Okay, Koukie, let's wrap it all up now. We've got a few questions from the audience. Let's go through them. Australia's aid, like in other words, what we spend in terms of what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, the war, does that have any impact on inflation?
No, not really. I think they're sort of humanitarian things. And in the scheme of the size of the Australian economy, let alone the world economy, they're not that big. Hundreds of millions of dollars, yes, so there's a lot of money. We've got to be part of a global citizenry and help the unfortunate people being caught up in these horrible conflicts in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine. But the impact on the economy is not huge. Yes, there's a bit of a hit to the budget, the money that we're giving and the defence equipment giving to the Ukrainian government and the like. But the impact on the economy is being swamped by everything else that's happening.
Negligible. The answer is no. Well, this is a big question from one of our listeners. Will 2024 see a recession? I mean, I actually think you've probably covered it off here today, Steve, because it's too hard to call.
It'll be something. Recession is I'm always get cautious talking about recessions because it's a label, not actually.
It's fictional.
It is, and if we don't have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, in theory we don't have a recession, but it can feel like a recession for a lot of people.
Yeah, you can have a labour recession for a start.
Indeed, and in fact, already per capita, GDP's gone backwards in 2023, the first 2 quarters of this year. So
a
per capita recession has already happened. So will there be a recession? Look, if the RBA keep hiking and hiking and hiking, which some people are suggesting they need to, the odds of a recession increase dramatically, of a genuine recession. You can define recession rather than GDP by the change in the unemployment rate. If unemployment rate goes up by 2 percentage points from the low to the high, that's a recession because you've just created quite a few 100,000 people on the dole queue. I don't think it's going to happen. Well, as we've just discussed, unemployment will edge up, no doubt, as the economy weakens. Recession, it'll feel like it for retail, for the areas where we consumers are hunkering down. It'll impact construction in the near term. We're already seeing construction companies go belly up, unfortunately, just when we need them to be building. So it depends where you are, what industry you are. But the economy is going to be subdued, not necessarily a recession.
And I think the takeout of it, don't get too caught up on the word recession because it means lots.
It's a scary word.
It means lots of things in lots of different contexts.
Correct.
Is it wrong to have any narrative, and money markets are certainly predicting it, given the structural changes that we're experiencing, and that goes right down to geopolitical problems, etc. Is it wrong to predict at any point rate reductions? In other words, will this be a permanently high rate or a permanently new normal rate environment?
I'll answer that by saying we're not going to go back to zero interest rates that we had during the pandemic. Well, unless we get another pandemic, heaven forbid, but we're not going back to there.
So you're correct. So the narrative, that's wrong to have that narrative.
Wrong to have the narrative. We're going to be returning to zero cash rates and 2% mortgage rates. That ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
Ain't going to happen. But it doesn't mean that. And if the economy so that earlier question about the recession or the hard landing for the economy or economic weakness, if we do get through to, say, the middle of next year or the second half of 2024 and the economy is weak, unemployment's hit 4.5%, as the RBA is forecasting, by the way, and wages growth is still contained, inflation comes down, the oil price is $70 and $60 a barrel, commodity prices are down, wages have been moderate at 3.5%, not 4.5%, there'll be cuts. There'll be cuts, but all we'll be talking about is, 1 percentage point off, 4.25s, and they'll be very cautious. This inflation experience has caused central banks around the world, including our own RBA, not to cut too much. Doesn't mean that they don't cut ever again. Of course they will. If the economy's weak, they'll cut. And I think that's the equation. So we're saying, well, why are they going to hike? Inflation and unemployment, and they're the two critical things. If this time next year inflation's at 2.5%, not impossible to put that into your forecast spreadsheet. Unemployment's 4.5%. Yep, they'll cut, but not a huge amount. I think we've just got to be. So the question's a good one. More likely, we'll see moderate cuts rather than the emergency cuts that we saw during the pandemic.
And I know I'd add something to that. I don't think the RBA is really worried about structural change, particularly on a global basis. Particularly worried. I think they're more likely to look for net zero. So they'll be chasing net zero rate. So and depending where inflation lands, let's make some presumptions. Let's say inflation's 3.5%. Yep. And therefore, it makes sense that interest rates might end up as a sustainable 3.5%. It's actually been running 3.5% for 8 months.
Yep.
I think there could be 2 rate reductions to get us closer to that 3.5%. So put us in a net zero position.
So, indeed. And again, so the more cautious approach will be, again, unless there's economic shocks, and of course we can't predict economic shocks coming from geopolitical things. We watch them happen and think, oh my God, that's extraordinary. But I think the critical, and sentiment, if all of a sudden people get optimistic again, whoosh, then inflation, or they get pessimistic, or they stay pessimistic, it'll boil down to cautious rate cuts if unemployment gets to 4.5 or more, and when, I won't say if, because inflation is falling, when inflation's comfortably in the 3s, maybe into the 2% region in annual terms.
Yeah, not just one, not 10 basis points or 20 basis points. No. It has to be, and it has to be there for a period.
And the RBA will not want to just do 1 or 2. They'll wait until there's clear evidence they need to cut, and that's going to require, well, it's probably 6 months of weak data and higher unemployment.
Yeah.
So it's a long way into the future. It's worth talking about, but not putting it into your central case.
Yeah, and money markets are talking about way down the end of 2024.
2024 or even 2025. So that period, there's sort of a flirting with the pricing of rate cuts, but we're not there yet.
And of course, the RBA has been talking about 2025. So the RBA has put us back into 2025, and it's always dangerous to do that. But they're sort of saying they expect inflation to be more under control 2025. So we're looking a long way down the track.
A long way down the track, correct.
Good on you, Kookie.